Hope everybody is doing well. It's definitely some very interesting weather we're having here in Durham, North Carolina. It's a little bit on the cool side on today, even though it's not cold. It could be worse. We could be in Denver, Colorado, where they were actually having snow and all along those lines, even though it is definitely the month of May. But I understand that they sometimes get that even in July and June. Well, I think June is what I heard was the latest, but still, they were having some there in the West Coast, particularly around Colorado, and I'm sure there are other parts of the world that are getting some of that weather also. But I did know that our temperature was going to be dropping, but not dropping down to freezing. Even though I think we did get near freezing about a week or so ago, and everything like that in the evening time, but not during the day because we've definitely been having more summer-like weather, well, spring-like weather. I won't call it summer-like because summer-like down here can get hot and humid in the 90s and the hundreds and all along those lines. And we've got some major events coming in at the Hayti Heritage Center, where I work at on regular basis. It's a cultural arts center that is in Durham, North Carolina. And tomorrow we'll have the author Britt Bennett joining us, and a friend of mine, Calissa Ray, will be moderating a talk with Britt Bennett, and all in that space. So that ought to be very interesting to hear how that talk goes. And then there's a traveling bus that'll be traveling to Durham as well. It's called the Boost Bus, and it's Culture in Motion, and it is actually Kwanzaa Jones and her husband, who just recently bought the San Diego Padres, or at least they're trying to close out that deal and everything along those lines. But they are bringing an Apollo-like bus complete with the museum of the Apollo. So they'll have videos and I think pictures of all the famous people that have been to the Apollo, which is being renovated there in New York City and everything along those lines. And then I think they'll be doing even an Apollo-like event, but it'll be out on the bus because I think the bus has a stage. When I was looking at the bus online, I'm going like, that is a long bus. I think it's like 40 feet long or something like that. So it's definitely a long bus that'll be traveling down here, trying to figure out where we're going to put it in our parking lot and all along those lines. But they will be doing that on Friday, the 8th. So this coming Friday, I think from 12 to 4, it'll be open for people to come in, take a look at all the paraphernalia and different interest items that they have of the Apollo and all along those lines. And then on the time from 6 to 9, and I think my friend Desan will be hosting that, they'll be doing a competition. We actually did a competition, me and my friends, Captain Newborn and Ray Pascal, who was our logistics guy, and a number of other folks, including our own house band and our own kind of Sandman and our own versions of the Kiki Shepherds. We had rotating people that did that, but we did that for about 12 years from 2014 to I believe 2015 or something like that. So we did it for about somewhere between 10 to 11 years, I guess, if I'm doing the correct math. But I do know we did it first at the Hayti Center, where this Apollo bus will be coming, and then we took it on the road. So we did, I think, about a year, maybe 2 years at the Hayti, and then 1 year at the Salvation Army, and then we took it to various events around North Carolina and everything like that. So we hit maybe about 15 or 20 of the counties here in the area and had a good time with that event and all along those lines. And our winners got to jump the line. If you know anything about talent shows, you know that sometimes they will have long lines where people are trying to get in them in order to win the money. But our arrangement was we got to jump the line, and we did have people that had success. I think one of the people got on, it was Timothy. They got on one of Tyler Perry's shows, and then there's others that have opened for sports events and all along those lines. And I've definitely been following sports events, been having a soccer game on earlier today and everything like that was on in my background as I was doing some other work, including some grading of test papers, since I do work for a testing company and all along those lines. And of course, I've been following what's going on in the Stanley Cup hunt, as right now the Carolina Hurricanes are 2 games above the Flyers. But right now they're going to Philadelphia, and hopefully they can win the next 2 games and complete another sweep, because they swept the first round opponent and they're up to nothing right now. So they do have the advantage, but we'll see how this all plays out as they are trying to win only their second Stanley Cup since they moved from Hartford some more than 20 years ago and all along those lines. And of course, people are following the NBA finals as well. And then I just heard that they're thinking about increasing the NCAA to 76 teams. I thought that 64 or 68 or whatever we've been up to was enough, but they're talking about possibly going up to 76. And of course, people are following a number of the things that are happening around the world, whether that is the conflict in Iran or the conflict in Ukraine with Russia, and a number of other things that are going on as well. But I'm very interested to hear what my guests have got going on in their life. I know I've got a life coach that's done a lot of work, and I've also got somebody that's done a lot of work in the political landscape and all along those lines. But I'm going to bring Karen on the first, because I know that a lot of times in the springtime, people get lonely. I mean, we just had Valentine's Day back in February, so that was a few months back, but then people are also thinking about their moms, because this is a Mother's Day and all along those lines. So I know that my mom is still living, so I'm very fortunate to have her still around. As a matter of fact, I just got a picture sent from my nephew that had originally been, from my brother that of my nephew that had originally been sent to my mother, because her grandchildren are now getting old. Yes, they have a habit of getting old as you get older yourself, and I am in my 60s and all along those lines. So the nephew who is all dressed to the T for his prom that he just had recently, and now he'll be graduating and going off to UNCG. So we were definitely glad to see that. And like I said, a lot of people will be attending college graduations, but the high school graduations will be in June, at least here. I know they're held at different times in different other parts. I think there may be some in May, late May, but most of them will be in June. So my nephew, the oldest one, will be graduating this June and then going off to college. His brother will be joining him later, but he's thinking he wants to go into the legal field and maybe be like a lawyer activist, is what I heard. I think his brother is thinking about being an engineer, and there's a year apart for them. And all along those lines, both born in August. So their birthdays are coming up as well. But I'll bring in Karen. I'm also going to bring in my other guest shortly. But Karen has done a lot of amazing work and has this book and has her agency, KarenKSmith.com, and everything like that. But she's doing a lot of work in terms of helping people get through loneliness and all along those lines. And I understand you have a book called Hope Has a Seat in Every Waiting Room. And I know that we need to have those waiting room seats and everything like that. So tell me a little bit about this book and what you've got going on with the book, because, this can be difficult seasons when we're switching from season to season, like going from spring to summer or winter to spring and all along those lines. So just tell me a little bit about the book. And then, like I said, we'll bring in the other guests later, but share with me a little bit about this book and how you came about writing it, because you are an author.
I am. I'm an author and a life coach. I wrote Hope Has a Seat in Every Waiting Room. It's actually not off the press yet. It will be very soon. It came out of my own journey of sitting in waiting rooms, and it applies to people in medical waiting rooms, which my story was a medical waiting room with my husband, who died of primary progressive MS. And so I sat in a lot of waiting rooms. So the book takes different types of waiting rooms that we sit in and we evaluate them. But the message is throughout the book is, I call it my C statements. And that is, I teach women in my book and in my coaching sessions that we have to, when we are in lonely seasons and we are in waiting seasons, that we have to learn to communicate confidently. We have to learn to connect with Christ or our faith, and we have to create a community around us. So often when we get in those seasons where we're in waiting rooms or we're in waiting seasons, we can get a little inclusive and withdrawn because we're busy and we're trying to survive. And so everybody else gets pushed away, and then we say we're lonely. And so we have to deal with this loneliness epidemic that we have going on. So that was the basis of my book, is to help people walk through these seasons where there's no answers. It's a waiting season and there is no answer in sight. My grown children had a miscarriage. Will they get pregnant again? They don't know. Will I ever have a baby? Infertility, that's a waiting season. There are so many seasons that we walk through that are waiting seasons. So the principles that I explore in this book are designed just for those seasons, for those waiting seasons that have no answer. And
Since
for
you
those,
mentioned the waiting season and all along those lines, because my younger brother, who I mentioned earlier, and he's got my two nephews, is diagnosed with MS. He's been living with it for a while. Our aunt actually passed away of that disease after having fought with it for multiple decades and everything like that. So we have much faith that he will live a long life, and he's been dealing with it for a long time now. I think he was diagnosed several years back and everything like that, but he does is doing well, and he hasn't got to that point of being immobile, even though he does sometimes have to walk with a walking stick and all along those lines. But he's definitely doing well and is part of a club that deals with the slingshot cars, which is those three-wheel cars. And he's definitely very active in our community, even helping to feed certain communities and everything like that. But even that waiting room thing, I remember one time I had a accident and all along those lines, and you'll get a kick out of this, even with your own experience with your husband and everything like that. But I had fallen and I had broken my arm. And this was when I was working at a community radio station. It was actually our local college radio station, but it's also a community radio station, meaning not every DJ was from the college. There were some of us that were community people. I would say the majority were community people. But they had asked me to come in on a snowy day. And the first clue should have been when I went there and the buses were not running, that I should have not bothered to try to go to the trip. But I went and tried to get to the station, which is maybe 3-4 miles away from where I lived at the time, because I was living in downtown Durham, and I managed to fall and break my arm. And I remember my brother coming to meet me because they called me to call somebody. So I called my dad, and I think he called my brother, but my brother has been accident prone in life and everything like that. And I remember that they had to draw blood and cast my arm and everything like that. When they were doing that, my brother got very faint and was about ready to faint. And I think both me and my dad were looking at him like, "You've been in tons of accidents. Why are you the one getting faint?" And he had the classic line that I'd never heard before. He was like, "Y'all don't understand. That's my brother's blood. When I've been in those wrecks, that was my blood." So it's a different kind of compassion thing when it's somebody else's blood and everything like that. So I'm imagining that was going on even in your own waiting room when you were dealing with your husband.
oh, absolutely. People, I have heard this statement that someone who is a caregiver or is in the waiting room, it's harder for them than it is for an actual patient.
Right.
And I don't know if that's true because I watched my husband struggle through so much. I think they may be hard in different ways. But definitely it is different when I go to give blood than to watch them do something to my husband. That was very, very different for sure.
Yeah, and that's what I meant. It's a different attitude that people have when they are having that waiting room attitude and everything like that. I know that even when my mom got sick and my dad got sick as well, and both of them are doing well and now and everything like that, and they're in their 80s, that the care that we get as well is important as well. So I was just wondering, did you feel that you had to learn a lot about sympathy for the doctors, and did you also have to be like a patient advocate? Because I know sometimes even my mom had to be her own patient advocate. I think they were trying to give her some food that might not have been the best reaction for her and everything like that. So she was an independent advocate and told them, "No, I'm not going to take that because that's not going to work for my body system and everything like that." So did you, even as you were dealing with your husband, wind up having to be a patient advocate? And there might have even been times that you had to be a patient advocate for yourself.
Absolutely. We had wonderful, I can say we had wonderful medical care. I would never complain over, well, he battled for 15 years, and over the 15 years, we had excellent medical care. I lost count of how many times he was in the hospital, and you definitely have to be an advocate for your own needs or for those that you're caring for. It's just your medical records pass through so many hands, so many doctors, so many nurses, and by the time it gets to you, it is sometimes communication is lost. And so I definitely had to be on top of what was going on, which is very, very common that you have to advocate for yourself or for your loved one. I wished it weren't that way. I wish we could just sit down in the chair beside our loved one and not worry about anything. But the reality is we do need to stay on top of what is best for us and what is best for our loved ones in medical situations or in waiting situations.
What was the most important lesson? I'm bringing the other author as well that you had to learn in the waiting room. Because, like I said, we all watch these hospital shows. I'm a big fan of Watson and everything like that. That we hear about all these things that go on, and sometimes they are over sensationalized and everything like that. But what's one of the biggest lessons that you had to learn when you found yourself in these waiting rooms, and it even sounded like you were going through a waiting room when some of your own children were having miscarriages and stuff like that? So, what's one of the most important lessons you learned in the waiting room space, and what are you hoping that the book will accomplish?
I had the most difficult, by far, the most difficult thing I had to learn was to let other people in my life, to create a community of people that could give, that could sustain. And that was really, really hard for me because I was a very independent soul, just very independent, and I still am. I still hate to receive from people, and I think that strong people are like that. It's like, "Oh, we don't need anything. We can do it by ourselves. I've got this all under control." That control mechanism helps us function. And so for me to step back and to admit that, I needed people in my life emotionally. I needed people in my life physically. I was taking care of a husband and I had 3 kids at home. And so I definitely needed 3 of me sometimes. And so I had to learn to let other people in. So that was definitely the hardest thing for me as I walked through those waiting room seasons, was that I had to learn to share vulnerably to keep myself from being lonely.
Yeah,
And
you
I had to
definitely.
let other people in.
Yeah, you definitely got to let other people in. Speaking of letting other people in, I'm going to bring another author in, and he's a best-selling author, so maybe he's got some advice since your book hasn't been published yet as to how to get these things published and everything like that. Because I'm curious to hear from him about that work-life balance, because you were going through troubles in terms of illness with your family members, but definitely that work-life balance is something that we talk about a lot on this show and everything like that. But Eric, you got this book that is talking about this amazing journey of the Wreck of the Mentor, a true story of death, despair, and the deliverance in the age of the sail. And I am ironically, I can't swim worth a lick, but I do enjoy going to the water, whether that's the beach or whatever like that. And I did go on my one cruise in life with a ex-girlfriend and all along those lines. And I did enjoy the cruise, even though a couple of times when I was walking around the cruise, I was going like, I hope I don't fall out of this boat, because if I fall in this ocean, I'm doomed, because I don't know how to swim and I don't know really where the lifeboats are and everything like that. So it would not have been a pretty picture and everything like that. But I do know that your book is a tale of survival, moral fracture, and even cross-cultural encounters, which we're hearing a lot of talk about cross-cultural works in this day and everything like that. But it's set way back in 1832 and everything like that. So what advice would you give to folks about that are publishing a book? Because she's got this wonderful book about dealing with what's going on, and you are a best-selling author, so you've probably published several books. So maybe you got some great advice for Karen.
Well, let me first start out by telling you a little bit about the book, and then I'll offer my free advice, which hopefully will be of some help. But let me answer one of the questions that you raised. You can't swim. Back in 1832, most sailors, if they were on a ship in the middle of the ocean and they sank, most of them didn't know how to swim either. So it's not unique. A lot of people would drown, and that was a real problem back then, even though they're on the boat in the middle of the ocean. But anyway, the Wreck of the Mentor is about a whale ship that left from New Bedford, Massachusetts in 1832, and it crashed in a reef off the archipelago of Palau, which is in the western part of the Pacific Ocean. Within a day of crashing, half of the crew, 11 men, were dead. And that is just the beginning of the story. Over the next 4 years, there are vicious attacks, displays of kindness and compassion, a desperate open ocean voyage, escapes, periods of starvation, a murder, fraught negotiations, and even a rescue mission that was sent out by President Andrew Jackson to get the last of the whalemen on Palau back to the United States. And only 7 out of 22 men survived. But as for advice, this is my 17th book. My publisher is W.W. Norton for my last 9 books. Most of my books are about maritime history. Some are about terrestrial history. One is about getting a PhD, the process of surviving getting a PhD. But if I'm going to give one word of advice, and Karen probably doesn't need this if she's already written the book and on the precipice of publication, is you have to embrace failure. I mean, I went to school, I have an undergraduate master's and a PhD, but not in history. I have degrees in biology and environmental policy, and I worked for many years. And if you saw my resume, you'd think I couldn't keep a job, but I had jobs all the way from working in the United States Senate to being an environmental consultant in England, to working for the National Wildlife Federation, to working for the Environmental Protection Agency, and probably 7 or 8 other jobs. But all along, I always loved writing. And I would write late at night, early in the morning. My wife was very supportive. And it was not until about 1999, the year 2000, when I told Jennifer that I'd like to be a full-time writer. And she didn't laugh. She's a very supportive person. She said, well, you have to put aside a year's worth of your salary before you quit your job. And I was a fairly high-level government official at the time. So I worked for 6 years, and I wrote 4 more books on my spare time. I drank an intense amount of coffee back then, had 2 little kids. And in 2007, we're watching TV, the TV show House. And during a commercial break, Jennifer looks over at me and she says, you can quit your job. I said, what? I totally forgotten about it. I mean, I wasn't thinking about it at the time. You can quit your job. I said, what? And she said, you've put aside a year's worth of your salary. She set up a bank account for me. She handles all of our money. And she said, if you want to try this writing thing, you can quit your job. And it was kind of shocking to get what you want. And I was a little scared because nobody wants to give up a steady paycheck. But a month later, I quit my job and I've been a full-time writer ever since. So embrace failure. I have a whole file cabinet full of rejection letters. I can remember even the first book that enabled me to quit my job was called Leviathan, The History of Whaling in America. It did very well, and that's what helped me quit my job. However, when my literary agent sent out my proposal, I wrote a 100-page proposal for that book because I was a relatively unknown writer, at least to major publishers. And when he sent it out to 25 publishers, we got 23 rejections. 2 places were interested, and I went with one of them. But of those 23 rejections, which he shared with me, every single one of them said, we think it's a great proposal, but we don't think the book will sell. All I can say is that's one of my most successful books. So it shows how, people that evaluate your work when you're a writer, Agatha Christie, there's a famous story about Agatha Christie, probably one of the best-selling writers of all time. She got rejected scores of times before she was able to sell her first book. J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, she was rejected scores of times. So I guess there's 2 messages: accept failure and don't always trust somebody else's judgment.
Right.
Speaking of that, I've got a friend that just recently wrote a book about slavery and kind of like discovering some of the slavery and interracial roots and all along those lines. It's actually the gentleman that I mentioned earlier that we did the Road to the Apollo, which is separate from the Apollo event that's coming to Durham in 2 days and everything along those lines. But he has already been getting movie interest. And I know that your book, Left for Dead, got some interest in terms of movie interest and all along those lines, because it apparently had some interest in terms of movie blockbusters and stuff like that. So I know sometimes people, particularly with books that have adventure in them, they are thinking about how the book can become a movie. Not so much the self-help kind of like books like what Karen has written, but definitely some of the other kind of books. So I was just wondering, Ken, your thoughts around this notion, because he has got a local agent, from what I understand. I was talking to him yesterday, and I understand that he has already gotten some movie interest, because apparently it's a continuation. So speaking of caregiving, it's a continuation of the stories that he just recently lost his dad, like in the last year or 2. So his dad had actually started the book, and then he had told his dad that was going to be one of the things he was going to do, was finish the book for his dad. It's kind of like his gift to his dying dad and everything like that, because it definitely talks about some of the family history and some of the race history within that, and the interracial connection between both white and black. And I think that you have some cross-cultural connections in your latest book as well. But I'm just wondering, for those that are thinking about possibly having their book turned into a movie, what advice would you give? Because it sounds like that book that I just mentioned, that it had some movie interest. Now, whether it ever got turned into a movie or not, that I don't know.
No, well, I wish you were correct, but The Wreck of the Mentor hasn't come out yet. It comes out on June 2nd. I've had no movie interest in that yet. However, a number of people who have read it, advanced copies, have said it should be made into a movie. And I've had some of my past book optioned for TV. One was almost optioned for a movie.
I think that's what I'm talking about. It was Left 4 Dead, because they talked about it being a tale with elements of a movie blockbuster.
That was my last book, Left 4 Dead. Yeah, no, listen, my advice can only be given in relation to people I know who have had their books made into movies. And all I could say is it's a nice shiny object. It's great if it happens, but most books that are optioned for a movie get optioned and you make some money and then never get made into a movie, like 95%. So even if you're lucky enough to get optioned for a movie, which is very rare to begin with, the odds of it actually going through a studio and getting made into a movie are even rarer still. I would love to have one of my books made into a movie. It reminds me of my mother. Hopefully this will come out the right way, but my mother, who's 92, she's watched me write for many years. And the first question she asks me when I tell her about a book, and it's not good, she says, "Eric, does it have any sex in it?" And I say, "No, Mom, it doesn't." She goes, "That's what sells. You have to put sex in your book." So none of my books have really had any sex in them. They've been about American history. But I just find it funny because my mother's always thinking, that's how you get a movie made. If you, there have been movies made about compassion and medical drama, certainly, and family duress and going through serious diseases, whether it be Alzheimer's or cancer. Right. So I think there's a well-worn path. There are a lot of movies and TV shows, obviously, that focus on the vicissitudes of life and especially health concerns and losing loved ones. I mean, it's very compelling because we almost all, unfortunately, go through it.
Yeah, we all go through it at one point or another, and all along those lines. Yeah. I did have a question for one of the other books you mentioned, because I've right here in the University Lane. I mean, Durham is known for a lot of things, as is the Triangle, and we've got a number of universities. I mean, Duke is literally around the corner from me at the apartment that I live in and everything like that, and Central is not that far. UNC is only a few miles away, and even some of the ones in Raleigh and everything like that. And you mentioned that you had done a book basically about your experience going through the college lanes and everything like that, Eric. So what advice would you give to folks? Because I got some friends that are in that university lane. Some of them are glad to be in that university lane, but they also complain about it because there's that whole tenure battle as to whether you're going to become tenured or not tenured, and all along those lines. And a lot of times they have to do yearly contracts. It can be very almost trying, because I know sometimes it can be year to year, or even sometimes 3 years to 3 years. So I just wondered, what did you find out? And we'll get back to some of the history when you wrote that particular book, because I know a number of my friends that watch this show are fellow people that have gone through the college professor lanes.
Yeah. Well, the book's called The PhD Survival Guide, and it's a satirical look at getting a PhD. Basically, what happened is I got my PhD in environmental policy at MIT, which is kind of a tough place to be for me, because I wanted to be a professor, but halfway through my PhD, I decided I didn't want to be a professor, mainly because I didn't want to have to write the kinds of things that I knew I would have to write to get tenure at a university. So I finally struggled. I actually thought about dropping out, but my fiance at the time said, "Okay, I don't care. You drop out. You don't need your PhD. But if you drop out, I never want to hear you breathe a word about this again." And I knew I wasn't man enough to do that. And I paid for my graduate work. My parents couldn't help me out. And so I said, okay, I sucked it up. I finished my PhD. I didn't apply for a single teaching job, which is the only reason I went to get a PhD. So the advice I would give to anybody thinking about the process is really do a good, deep analysis as to why you want to get this degree and what you want to do and what your prospects are for getting employment. Because I have other friends of mine who got PhDs from very good universities, and they had an incredible struggle getting any kind of good job. And this was decades ago. Now it's even worse. If you're in a PhD program, if you love what you're doing, great. That's what you should do your whole life. You should love what you're doing. But if you're in a PhD program and you're lonely and you're doubting yourself, cut yourself some slack. Finish the degree. This is not going to be the most important document written on the face of the earth. It's just, you need to just write it good enough so you can defend it and get your dissertation and get out of there. A lot of PhDs, and I don't mean to cast aspersions on PhDs, a lot of people have PhDs and history professors. I love them because they do a lot of great work. But when I was a PhD candidate and since, I have encountered more than my fair share of people with doctorates who are so full of themselves. Get over yourself. Just because you have a PhD doesn't mean you're any smarter than anybody else or have the secret to life. But if you're doing what you love and you need the PhD to do it, then by all means, go get your PhD. But it's a big investment of time. And it took me almost 6 years. And I had to teach. I was a teaching assistant for 8 different classes. I taught 2 classes entirely. I had other side jobs. I mean, it was a real struggle. And if I know what I knew now, which is what I love, writing history, I don't know if I would have gone for the PhD. When my wife married me, she introduced me to her friends. This is my husband, debt, because I had $40,000 in college debt when I got out of school. So, and anyway, so I think it's great if you're in a PhD for the right program, you want to teach, you want to do research, then great. Getting a PhD is great. But I also have my problems with the whole program, including the one that I don't think it should take forever. No degree should take even 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years. It just becomes too much.
It's interesting you say that and everything along those lines, because my brother, who I just mentioned everything, I was talking to my mom a few days ago, and I had asked her whether my brother had completed his degree, because I think mom's got honorary degrees. I don't think that she ever got her doctorate. My dad is a doctorate, but my brother has got his master's, and I was asking whether he had completed his PhD. And I think that she had recently had a conversation with him, and that's basically what he just said, with the medical stuff that he's going through, with the having 2 boys, and one of them now getting ready to go off to college himself, and just his own work, that it was becoming too much of a time drain. So he just basically decided that it was not worth it. He enjoys the work that he does, helping youth that are going through trouble. Some people like to use that term at risk. I'm not a big fan of that, because I think it kind of paints them into a corner and all along those lines. But he was definitely doing work with those kind of youth that are needing guidance and everything like that. And so he enjoys his work and has always enjoyed his work, and doesn't necessarily need the PhD, to your point, to make him validate him and all along those lines. Because I think some people use it as a validation tool and everything like that. But he didn't need the validation. So he's like, I'm content with my master's, and I only have a bachelor's, and I'm perfectly content with that, even though I've thought about going back to get a master's or a PhD even in my late life. But I'm good with what I'm doing right now and everything like that. I was curious, because one of the things that I am involved in is history. I am the historian at the venue that I was talking about and everything like that. So there's a whole community around Black Wall Street, and I'm give talks on that and a number of other things. And I became the historian, ironically, because of the death of the person that used to do it, because he passed away, and then it was passed on to me, because I've got a lot of institutional knowledge of that particular venue and that particular city and some of the history around Black Wall Street in general and everything like that. But I've always had a love of politics, history to some degree, and definitely journalism. But I was wondering, what about history was your passion, Eric? And when did you first become interested in maritime history and everything like that? Because I am considered the staff historian at my venue, but I was wondering what drew you into history.
Well, sort of a circuitous route. When I was a kid, I wanted to be Jacques Cousteau when I grew up. I was really into biology, marine biology. I loved the ocean. I was a very serious seashell collector, so serious that when I went to college, I wanted to be a malacologist, which is a scientist who studies seashells. One of my recommendations for college was written by the head of the mollusk department at the Museum of Natural History in New York City. And when I got to college, the Alumni Monthly wrote an article about me my first semester that said the admissions office called him Shellman. I mean, I was really serious. I read science all the time, but I suddenly discovered at college that I'm not very good at hard science, physics, chemistry, biology, lab work. It just wasn't for me. So I shifted to environmental policy and public policy, and that's what I got my subsequent degrees in. But writing just sort of, I don't know how to describe it. I was writing in high school. When I was a senior in high school, I wrote a 150-page paper on the mollusks of Long Island Sound, 2 chapters of which got published in a Malacology magazine. I was always writing. I was writing op-eds for the Hartford Courant. I had a couple of op-eds published in the New York Times when I was in college, and I was always writing on the side. I don't know where it came from. I wasn't particularly good in English class. I didn't really view myself as a creative writing kind of person. Not that I'm writing creatively, but I just was always writing in college, master's, PhD. And the thing that I liked most was in all of my jobs was the part of it that was writing. And just tell you a quick story. When I did my PhD, it was on the cleanup of Boston Harbor and the role of the courts in cleaning up the harbor. And after about a year and a half of working on it, I had 600 pages written, which was only a few chapters. It was way too long. And one of my advisors, he called me into his office. He goes, Eric, what you've written, it's fascinating history, but it's not a PhD. It's not, you don't test any hypotheses. It's just history about the pollution of Boston Harbor. And there's no way I'm ever going to read a dissertation that's 1,200 pages because you're only halfway done. And he said, why don't you quit the program and become a writer? You're a really good writer. And I looked at him and I said, Larry, the only thing more pathetic than a PhD student is a writer. And he laughed. And then I finished my program. That Larry, by the way, happened to be the future president of Harvard University. He's a really sharp guy. But wow. He gave me good advice. And the way I got into maritime history is I've always lived near the ocean. I collected seashells. I was into Jacques Cousteau. I live in Marblehead, Massachusetts right now, which is on the water. And there's something about the ocean that's always drawn me, which is funny because I'm not a sailor. If I go on a boat and I'm out of sight of the land, I get a little nervous.
Yeah.
So, but I love reading about, I don't know, I just love reading about maritime history. And when I decided I wanted to be a writer, I had to think, well, what's my topic area? Even though my next book might not be on maritime history, I've sort of fallen into that niche. And, it's fine. They're great.
And sometimes the niches can be cross niches, because as you were saying that, I remember one of the books that I used to enjoy reading. I think it was about a horse that was on the ocean. I can't remember what the horse was and everything like that, but it was definitely one of the books that I remember reading as a youngster. And I definitely remember hearing about some of the Geechee culture that was out there off of the coast of South Carolina and all along those lines. And we just had the Kentucky Derby with the great come from behind victory and everything like that. So I was just wondering, is there a topic that you were hoping to write about that you haven't written about as of yet? You mentioned the PhD and most of the books being in the maritime field, but is there a topic that you're also interested in that you're doing research on, but you haven't got to writing about it as of yet?
There are potentially hundreds of topics. I'm actually looking for a book topic right now. I don't tend to talk about what my next project is, but I've come across about 3 or 4 ideas. I've researched them, and each one I've decided not to pursue. So I'm still sort of in limbo. I'd love to write. The problem is with being a writer today, or maybe this is any generation, is that there's so many good books that are written, and so many good books that have been written in the last 20 years where you look at them and say, oh, I wish they didn't write that book because I'd like to write it. Like Lewis and Clark. There's a book that just came out a couple of weeks ago on Lewis and Clark. How many books can we have on Lewis and Clark? I'm sure it's a great story. I wrote about Lewis and Clark in my fur trade book, but if I had known that there was going to be another Lewis and Clark book and people were going to say, oh, this is a great book, maybe I would have gone back and written on Lewis and Clark because I thought that was a fascinating story. There are stories in World War II. There are stories about, FDR, Teddy Roosevelt, about the Civil War, about the American Revolution, about shipwrecks, all sorts of books or stories that I would love to tell. But the problem is an awful lot of them have been told so many times. But the one thing I've learned is that doesn't foreclose options. Right. 7 years ago, I proposed to my agent writing a book about Captain Cook, James Cook. There are
Well,
so many books on James Cook. I started researching it and looking around. I decided there are too many books on James Cook. Well, what happens? Hampton Sides writes a book on James Cook last year. It's a big bestseller. So basically, it shows that I have bad decision-making skills. But as to what my next book is, I don't know. As long as it's an interesting topic that has a compelling story and involves, humans and animals, hopefully. I love animals. I'd like to weave them together. And if I could find a story like The Wreck of the Mentor or my last book, Left for Dead, which are stories nobody knows about, that's exciting. Writing a story that everybody will say, I never heard about this.
well, you just gave me an idea, and maybe there's out there that I'm not aware of. But you mentioned animals and maritime, and all along those lines. I got a question for Karen as well, just in terms of her own writing background and everything like that. But the last great animal book that I'm aware of, where there were a couple, one was fictional, which is kind of Avatar, and it was actually on a show, and they were talking about to a gentleman that actually did some of the special effects and everything along that in Avatar, the shows that's on before me and everything like that. But I was just wondering, the last great book with a maritime background that I can think of is Moby Dick, and there hasn't been a great book about any of the animals of the sea that I'm aware of. But maybe
No, there's been a great book, and I wrote it. I wrote a book called Leviathan: The History of Whaling in America, and it has a section about Herman Melville. So I've already written that book, and that was anyway. So it's a great topic. I love it. It's got all the themes, the grand themes, and going out in the ocean and doing battle, and Herman Melville and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't know.
I can't think of one that's like a character though, because Moby Dick was a character because he was the whale was part of the storyline. And I mean, I get your book, which is more of a historical kind of book, but I can't think of one that is actually a character in the book that is an animal. Even though there are tons of animals that are out there, like dolphins and whales and a number of sharks, a number of other ones. I mean, there was Jaws way back when and everything, but I can't think of anything recently that has been a hero book. Because
maybe Karen can give me some advice, because with the success of The Pit, that TV show, which I watch, Jen and I watch, I love it. Man, if I could figure out a topic that somehow connected medicine and emergency rooms with the open ocean, surgery on the open ocean, that would be great. But, I'm curious. I don't want to ask a question to Karen, but, she was talking about dealing with her own situation with her husband and other situations in her child. But The Pit, the one thing it doesn't really focus on a lot, it's everything in the emergency room. You have the waiting room. They jump into the waiting room every once in a while. They don't spend a lot of time there. Maybe you should write them a note and tell them there are great stories out in the waiting room too, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely. That one of the last episodes, well, in this last season of The Pit, because I'm an avid watcher of it, but in the season that just ended, I felt like they did a little bit of waiting room kind of thing with the lady who came in that had cancer, that was dying. And she was basically on hospice, but I think in reality, she made the decision, you know what, I don't want to die at my house. I feel better here. Do you remember the episode that I'm talking about?
I think so. Maybe we haven't caught up that far. I remember the episode about the woman. Oh yes, absolutely. And her two sons, and her husband was there. Yeah. And at first I thought that was going to be that episode, the multiple episodes. She was over multiple episodes. I thought I was really blindsided, because I thought that she and her husband were having a major disagreement, and that he wanted her to do one thing, she wanted to do another thing, and that she was waiting for him to leave the room so she could confide in the doctors. But it didn't end up being that. I thought there was this tension. Maybe the husband was manipulative or doing something that was wrong, but in the end, he was just there, and she just that was very touching and sad, and seeing her children there and having to deal with that. It was very difficult.
Well, I
Yeah.
mentioned Watson earlier and everything like that, Kathy, and I know Watson has been having some waiting room scenes because apparently the character Watson is in his own health crisis and everything like that. So they've been actually sending him to a specialty hospital, and of course he wants to be hands-on with his intern, so he's kind of like just kind of ignored what the doctors wanted him to do and came back to the hospital partially because they have found Sherlock, who is also going through some stuff as well in terms of like memory. So I think he's dealing with dementia and everything like that. So it sounds like there's some waiting room scenes in that movie, and they've also got some action and intrigue going on because it's a typical Sherlock Holmes, Watson, Mordecai kind of plot line, even though it's set in the hospital.
What's that movie? I don't think I've seen it.
It's called Watson. It's a TV series. It's been on now for a few years. I want to say it's on CBS. It's on one of the major networks and everything like that. But
Okay.
it's actually a black gentleman and an African American gentleman is playing the character of Watson. But they've got an actual character playing Sherlock Holmes because Watson is actually a doctor in this scene and everything like that. And that's what I was going to ask you earlier, Kathy. Are you actually kind of like our other guest, Eric? Were you always knowing that you were going to be a writer, or did writing kind of fall into you, or did you one of those students that when you were in school you were trying to avoid writing at all costs?
I was not a writer. I was not. This is a true story. How embarrassing. At my college, you had to take this test after you took freshman comp and literature. You had to take this test so that you didn't take any more English classes. And I failed that test. I had to take remedial English. So, no, I have not always been a writer. I never dreamed that I would be a writer. However, this is my second book. I have a book called Nearsighted, Choosing to See Eating Disorders Differently. And so this will be my second book coming out. And I think for me, I started writing when my husband went to Mayo Health Clinic
Mhm.
for his diagnosis, and they provide these little Caring Bridge sites or something.
Mhm.
If you've ever watched somebody go through a medical trauma, they give them this blog site basically even before blogs were a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started writing there because I thought it was easier to put all of the details there so that I didn't have to talk about it, because it was hard to talk about, It's hard to sit in a waiting room and for somebody to tell you your husband's going to die within 15 years and he's going to quit walking within 5 years. And I mean, those are hard things to talk about. So I started writing all of that down so that I didn't have to talk about it. So
Mm.
that's how my writing originated. And then when we came home, I ended up starting a blog way back when, and I just started writing, and people would come up to me and say, "Oh my gosh, I love that," or "You encouraged me so much with that." And so I think my writing developed over time. And as I have had life experiences, and my daughter, my 16-year-old, actually told me the other day, "Mom, you should write a fiction book." And I said, "Oh, I don't know that my brain thinks like that. That's a different kind of genre than writing in nonfiction." And she said, "Oh, I think you could do it really well, Mom." I'm like, "Oh, I don't know about that."
So maybe
But
there's a
she has
fiction book
planted that seed.
there's a fiction book maybe in your future as well and everything like that. You just mentioned something about your husband that I was curious about because I had a friend that was with one of our local arts organizations. They passed away after they were given a terminal illness and everything like that. But they lived beyond their time that they were given, because I think that they were told that they would be passed away within, say, a year. And I think they wound up living an extra year and a half to 2 years past that time. So I was just wondering, how much do you think mindset is also important when people get these diagnoses? Because I definitely think that Michelle Gonzalez Green was her name, was very much had this mindset that she was not going to just go quietly by the night, if I can use that kind of alliteration and everything like that. She was going to fight all the way to the end and just kind of like live her life to the fullest, but also try to live it past what the doctors were saying the diagnosis was.
Absolutely. I think that is with any hard thing in life. Your attitude and your outward focus, where your eyes are focused, is super, super important for overcoming hard things, whether it's in the writing world, whether it's in real life, whether it's in waiting room seasons. How we persevere is important. And I think there's a lot of people that leave this earth because they've quit living. They're
Yeah.
just like, "I'm done. I have no purpose anymore." And, I think a lot of people struggle with that is what is my purpose? What is my purpose? I don't know what it is. And when people struggle with that, then they don't seem to have the tenacity that other people have. So I think outlook and focus is huge. I know in my own situation, my husband was an avid, he was all but dissertation. So I was laughing when y'all were talking about that because he called it a hazing ritual, but uh, um, just his outlook on life. Initially of course we struggled with that diagnosis. But we were able to turn that around. And, I to be a dad, you still get to be a dad while you're here. And that's really important. And you still have this, or, relating our life to what our purpose is for anything we walk through is super important. It's
Yeah.
really important as a writer to have that tenacity.
You definitely gotta have that tenacity as a writer and everything like that. What were you majoring at when you were in school and all along those lines? Because you mentioned that writing was not your field. It sounds like, as I guess Eric was going through kind of this notion of law and politics and stuff along those lines. But what were you studying when you were in college and everything like that? And which college did you go to, if I may ask?
So I went to a college in Arkansas called Ouachita Baptist University. It's a little private liberal arts college in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, in the middle of nowhere. And so that's where I went. I got an early education degree and I got my middle school certification in history and math. And I really got my middle school certification because in a liberal arts, you have to take so many history classes. And so I had enough history classes to get my middle school certification. And I was one of those kids growing up that I really didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I just wasn't sure. And so I thought I would be a math teacher until I took calculus. And then I'm like, oh my, no, I don't want to be a math teacher. I can't imagine Cal 3. I'm just happy to pass Cal 1, So that's how I got my middle school math certification, was I only needed one more math class. So I literally sat down with my advisor and I said, what degree can I get? Because I only have 2 more years, like I have to get a degree in 4 years. And so anyway, I ended up with elementary education, and I take that back. I have taught school online. I have never taught school in person from 8 to 3 every day. So it is very interesting, but I have worked in churches as children's pastor. So I did end up using my education degree a lot in my younger years.
As a
But
children's
yeah,
pastor and everything like that, you were talking about that notion of the math and everything like that. And I remember in high school, and I went to a small country town in North Carolina, in Warren County, North Carolina. Horace Greeley actually went through there. It's got a plaque in his name, the Go West young man, gentleman, and everything like that. Because I think he was passing through, actually doing caregiving. I think he was taking care of a sick relative and wound up in that particular town, if I remember the story correctly, based on that plaque that is there and all along those lines. But I remember having a physics teacher. Was it physics? Yeah, I think it was physics, because we had only maybe 8 people in the physics class and everything. So to your point, I remember that this teacher from Laos was given this whole formula and everything like this. So they wrote the whole formula on the bulletin board, or on the board that was there. And at some point in the middle of writing the formula, they turned around and looked at their 8 to 10 students, because it was a small class, because the school was small in the first place, and definitely those of us taking physics was not that many. And this is one of those classic, you're in trouble with your teacher and everything like that. She turned around, and in the thickest accent that I have ever heard in my life, she's like, I'm not sure that I'm doing this right. So I think we were all going like, well, if you don't know that you're doing it right, how the heck are we supposed to know that it's right?
right.
She's sitting there going like, I'm not sure that this is right at all. So I'm going like, because I think she was fresh out of college and everything like that. So she probably did not have it totally memorized and everything like that. But as a young 18, 19-year-old, I'm going like, no, this is not a good sign and everything like that. Because I was actually telling, we're in the middle of baseball season right now. And I was telling a friend of mine that the Milwaukee Brewers won only one pennant, and that was back in '82 when I was a young 20-year-old. And this is one of them stories about perseverance you were talking about and all along those lines. So I went, after they won, I said, I'm going to go to the library and study. I was actually talking to a friend who was going to the library today because they're studying to get their, I think, real estate or insurance license and everything like that. But they were going to go and study their whole notion of, I was going to go and study in the library. Don't try to celebrate. Don't try to study. There's a major celebration going on. I should have learned that and remembered that from my being not that far from UNC and Duke and everything like that. So I went to the main floor. I heard nothing but cars squeaking and people yelling and cheering. So I'm like, I'm going to go to the basement. The noise is not going to creep down to the basement. Yeah, right. The noise creeped down to the basement too. So as a young 20-year-old, and I'm 64 now, I just gave up and joined the party. So I was like, I give up. And to your point about PhDs, Eric, I was like, just knew I was going to flunk that. And even what you went through with your math class, I just knew I was going to flunk that test because I had not studied because I joined the party. And when I got to the class, I think the teacher knew that too. So the teacher basically wrote out, I think it was a keg, and was basically like, we're not going to have the test. Y'all can join me for a drink if you want to continue the celebration, and y'all can go to your other classes. But we're not going to actually have a test because none of y'all are going to pass. So they already knew that was going to be the case and everything like that. So they were like, none of y'all can pass. One of the things I talk about on this show quite often, I was curious to hear from both of you and everything like that is, and you kind of alluded to it earlier and everything, Kathy, but how do you deal with the work-life balance and everything like that? And Karen, how do you deal with the work-life balance and everything in that space? Because we do have sometimes people where on this show, we talk about how to have that work-life balance and whether it is even a real thing or whether it's a fiction and everything like that. So I just wonder, how did you deal with that work-life balance and how did you deal with it when your husband was living and even now, I guess, as a widow, and actually one of our founders is a widow also, Miss Kimberly, because she lost her husband a few years ago and she has grown kids and everything like that. But how do you deal with that work-life balance?
So, in the writing world, Eric can testify to this. I often hear, well, you need to set writing hours. Like you need to set, it's a job, and you need to set it aside time to write. Well, unfortunately, my life does not allow that. It just does not. And so life has always come first for me, and I write secondary. So I don't have this. I write from 8 to 5, and then I get done. I write in holes here and there. I write sitting in a car waiting on a teenager. I write here and there. And then I begin to pull things together. And I do most of my writing in the evenings. We sit down and we watch shows. We are, like right now, we're rewatching NCIS. And so in the evenings, when we have a quiet evening, that's when I get so much of my writing done, is sitting in the living room with my family, with my kids, and just writing away, so I have a different story than some people. Some people have that work-life differentiation. I don't. Mine's just conglomerated together.
Yeah.
What about you, Eric?
Well, it changed over time. When I used to have a full-time job and I had little kids, it was difficult because I went to work during the day. But one of the things I did in most of my jobs is I would leave very early in the morning. My last job that I had 5 years before I quit and became a writer, I would leave the house at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd get to work at 5:45, and then I'd be able to leave early in the afternoon to pick up the kids from school. Every night, my wife would, after the kids went to sleep, I was allowed to write. And then this is why I mentioned coffee. I would wake up at 3:30 in the morning, most mornings during the week, and write for an hour and a half or an hour before I went to work. And on the weekends, my wife would give me Saturdays to write. So I'd wake up and I'd write until 5 o'clock. So it was very difficult at that point. When I became a full-time writer, it became easier because, that was my job, was writing. So during the day when everybody was out, my kids were at school, my wife was working, that's when I wrote. I'm not one of those people who writes every day. A lot of my work is researching and not writing, but I try. Sometimes I go in spurts. Now it's even easier. I mean, I'm 64. My kids are in their 20s. They have their own life. My wife has a very responsible job that requires her to travel a fair bit. So 1 week out every month, my wife's away, either in another country or someplace else. And during the day she works. So I have a lot of time to write. In fact, I have a lot of time to not write, to do other
Mhm.
things. I'm a big gardener. I exercise a lot. It depends. So right now, my work-life balance, it's pretty easy to maintain. It wasn't easy when I had a regular job and writing was just something I was doing sort of on the side and hoping to do full time someday. That was very difficult. I couldn't do that now. I mean, that was when I was in my 30s, pretty much 30s and early 40s. I had more energy. I was willing to be sleep deprived more than I am now. But I'm talking to you. This is my office on the third floor of our house, and I spend a lot of time in this office or the local library just reading. So that's the way I do it.
Eric, how much is research important for you? Because I know that the latest book does deal with some cross-cultural stuff and probably some places that you haven't been to. I'm imagining that as a maritime person, you probably have done some travel, but there are probably parts even
Yeah.
in this book that you haven't been to. And part of
Oh,
that is
yeah.
probably research-based and everything like that. So how much did you have to research the different places and even the different cultures in order to incorporate them into this book? Because I did notice that it's
Oh,
got some cross-cultural elements.
no, I had to really understand Palauan culture, and I did that by reading a lot of books written by Palauans and oral histories about Palau's history. But to be honest, I haven't been to Palau. Palau is 500 miles east of the Philippines. I didn't need to go to Palau to write the story. If I did, I would have gone. But it's funny, I just sent a package yesterday to the president of Palau, a copy of my book, saying, here, I hope you like it, because I had some Palauans help me. And who knows, maybe he'll read the book and he'll like it so much, he'll say, you have to come to Palau and give an honorary talk. That
As
would
you
be
can
nice. But no, but other books I've been, when I wrote on whaling, I had a fellowship that allowed me to stay on Nantucket for 2 weeks and do research there. I've been to places that relate to what I've been writing on, but I have to admit, it's gotten a lot easier. 20 years ago, for me to write a book, I had to go to all these specialized libraries. I had to do a lot of traveling. Now, all the primary materials, the journals, the books, the newspaper articles, with just a couple of keystrokes on my computer, I can have them in front of me. It's really gotten a lot easier to do historical research and writing. And the last thing I'll say is, if I had unlimited resources, or my books were selling millions of copies, so I was raking in millions of dollars, then I probably would have traveled to Palau. But for me to go to Palau and travel, and I don't think it would have made the book any better.
Yeah.
But
How important do you think it is
to do
how
that would
important do
have
you think
cost
it
a
is?
lot of money.
Yeah, it definitely would cost a lot of money. How important do you think it is, and this is for both of you, to understand history? Because, like I said, I am definitely a staff historian at the Cultural Arts Center that I work at, but I do sometimes feel that we don't give history enough dues, and sometimes people just kind of disregard it, even those that are going off to high school and college and places like that. But I'm just wondering how important, even in your own families, has understanding your history and your legacies been? Because I even mentioned my friend that wrote a book based on his family history, and I know that even in my own family, my grandmother started one of the first African American libraries in our state capital and everything, actually the first one and everything like that. But I was just wondering, how important do you think it is for people to understand history in general? And this is for both of you.
Go ahead,
So
Karen.
I would say that, I don't write about historical events, but for personally and in my family, civil rights is a huge um, issue that we have and that we advocate for. And we do that because one of our best friends are an interracial couple. And, I think we don't understand what African Americans have to walk through and the judgments that exist. And so we have become very much supporters of civil rights and advocating for those because of, once again, because of relationships that are in our lives. I also am really fond of ancient history,
Mm-hmm.
just because that's what I have. That's one of my favorite topics I've taught my kids as I've homeschooled them is, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Romans, that if I had to choose a historical time, that is some of my favorite history. And my 16-year-old and I were even taking last weekend, we were talking about something that was in the Bible. And I'm like, but let's go back. Let's take that and put that into this historical timeline. So it really shapes our whole lives in essence, what has happened in history.
Yep.
For me, if you don't understand history, I mean, it's a trite saying, you can't really understand the present, or you're doomed to repeat it necessarily.
Yeah.
But history is about human interactions mediated by whatever, trade, commerce, wars. And if you don't have a good grasp of history, you might run into the problem of thinking that the issues that you're dealing with in your life are totally new and nobody else had to go through them, which is definitely not the case. And I think one thing that history does is it gives you a broader perspective on the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably tends to make you more compassionate, or at least understanding of differences that are in society. And you can understand why are things the way they are today. Because just think of it, if you got plopped down here, you're an alien and you saw our world today and you had no knowledge of history, you'd have a very different perspective on what was going on today if you had an understanding of history. So I'm a big believer in understanding history and understanding your place in that history. I can't say that my family always agrees. My wife reads all my books. My two kids, they've only one. My daughter's read, I think, 2 of my books. My son, he's too much into sci-fi and stuff like that. He doesn't read any of my books. So I guess I haven't instilled, but they like history. He loves Roman history and World War II history. And my daughter's a literary agent, but she does fiction. So she represents fiction writers. But anyway, I can't imagine going through life and doing anything without having an appreciation for history. Just in the town you live in, you walk around to know what happened at that church, what happened at that building, what happened in that field, what was it like 100 years ago. It just enriches your current life. And it also, I think, gives you an ability to make better decisions about what to do in your own life, whether it's politics or personal. So I think I'm a big fan of history.
No, I'm a big fan of history as well. And Karen, your other book that you wrote, and that's the one that is published, you said that it's about something that is very prominent. I know a lot of people, sometimes they think it's only women that deal with it, but I know men that deal with it as well, which is that whole notion of eating disorders and some of those other things like that. So how did you come about getting that book and everything? Because I do know that there's that whole notion, even like I said, my nephew's going off to college, and I imagine he's going to put on the freshman 15 or the freshman 10, whatever they call it now, and everything like that. But it is some of the bad food that you get served in those campus cafeterias and all along those lines that is impacting our weight gains, particularly when we go off, even though I can say that even as a adult, and I'm the same age as you, Eric, is 64, or at least I'll be 64 in July because I'll turn that age in July and everything like that. So I do know that we can sometimes become too quick for fast life and everything like that, because we do live in the DoorDash economy and everything like that, where everybody is getting food that is not healthy for us because we all want it quick, fast, and in a hurry and everything like that. And I'm just as guilty. I haven't ordered any today, but doesn't mean I won't later on and everything like that. But I just wanted, could you share a little bit, Karen, about how this book came about, the one that is published already?
So in Nearsighted, I was the one that had an eating disorder. Right. And I struggled with an eating disorder most all my life, except when I was growing up, we didn't talk about eating disorders. I'm almost 52, and we didn't, I mean, that was not something that we talked about in school. We didn't learn about that. It was I guess it was a faux pas subject or an uneducated subject. So I had no clue there was anything wrong with my eating. I just didn't. And and so when I got really sick, taking care of my husband, I got really, really sick and ended up in eating disorder treatment as a 40-year-old. And I got to be the mom to a lot of college age students in there. And we had there was a young man in eating disorder treatment when I was there. But what came out of that season was I wanted my family to understand. I wanted to be able to hand them a book and say, read this and it's going to help you understand me better. And there was nothing like that out there. And so this is actually a resource for parents who have kids that are struggling with an eating disorder, because I had the privilege of, I say that privilege of being 40 and being able to articulate things that a 20-year-old can articulate. And so to be able to come along, and as a parent, to be able to come alongside another parent and go, hey, I need you to understand this. It's more than a choice, well, it's more than a choice.
Mm.
It's a sickness. And so so that's where that story was born. And that's what that book is for, is I was speaking eating disorder clinics and some places like that to help parents navigate walking with their child who has an eating disorder.
Do you think it's easier or maybe even more prominent in agricultural towns and everything like that? Because when I think of Arkansas, I definitely think of the Clintons and some of the people that have been past leaders of our country. But I also think about that being a very rural town. And I've got friends from Mississippi and Louisiana. But I'm wondering, do you think that it is more prevalent in big cities than, in small towns versus big cities, or is it just prevalent in all of the communities and everything like that? So does it have geographical twist to it? I guess is what I'm asking from what you've heard and read and studied.
I do not believe it has a geographical twist. An eating disorder has two components. You have to have a genetic component to have a real eating disorder. And most people have a traumatic event that spurs on. And when we say traumatic, it doesn't have to be this grand, glorious thing. It can be something as simple as a coach's statement to you when you were in high school that you need to lose a few pounds, and we pick up on that and we carry it with us. Right now, the big buzzword is what GLP-1s and the weight loss drugs. And I want to tell some people, you've taken enough of that drug. You're thin enough. You don't need it to be any thinner, because I can tell you at my thinnest, I was my sickest. And so I think that our society speaks to that. I think probably where we have a lot of movie making, if we had to choose any place that it's prevalent, is in these cities where we have a lot of movie making, video making, those sorts of things, because of the beautiful woman or the beautiful put together good looking man that you need to be, because society portrays people in certain ways. So I would say if we had to choose a culture, I would choose that culture, but it is not limited to that culture. It is across the bases.
Yeah, because I know some people that got into hearing about the eating disorders was when people got into the whole exercise phenomenon, like the Jane Fondas and some of those other home video things, that sometimes people were pushing themselves too hard, and sometimes they were starving themselves. I think that's when I first heard about like anorexia and bulimia and some of the other things back in the 80s and the 90s, and even probably as early as the 70s, when people were doing some of that purging stuff. And I guess they're still doing that to some degree now. It's kind of like the cutting that I know some teenagers do as well. But yeah, sometimes people are mutilating themselves and hurting themselves and not even realizing the damage that they're doing and everything. And I imagine that that's part of what the book deals with, is warning signals and how people can learn some of those warning signs. So the book touch on some of those warning signs, and what are some things that you have told people in your presentations to look for?
So isolation is huge in eating disorders. If an eating disorder can isolate you, then it has more power. And so an eating disorder, I like to equate it to Jiminy Cricket sitting on your shoulder, whispering in your ear, oh, don't believe them. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm smarter. I know you more. So that's what I like to put in a fun, creative way, is a person who has an eating disorder, think about Jiminy Cricket sitting on their shoulder, talking to them, but instead it's isolating them. It's pulling them away. So isolation is huge. They begin to step away from relationships. They begin to want to eat in isolation. They don't want to eat in a group. So those are two of the early signs to me of an eating disorder is isolation, and then not wanting to eat in a group. When I realized I had a significant problem was when my fingers were blue. And I had a friend go, "Why are your fingers blue?" And I go, "I don't know. They've been like that for a little while." And so I started researching, like, why are my fingers blue? And and I remember the moment that I walked in, my husband was in the bathroom and I walked in and I said, "I think I have a problem." Like, it was a realization moment. Like, I think I might be struggling with an eating disorder because my fingers are blue. And that's like a sign. So that would be a more advanced sign of an eating disorder. So I think it totally ranges, but I think some of the beginning signs are isolation and eating. And then I think if you want to go to the extreme, it's their head's bigger than their body, or their fingers are blue, or things like that. So that's in what we used to call anorexia. That would be some of those symptoms. Well, they would be different for bulimia, but all of it is a control mechanism. Whatever eating disorder you have, and now they're all clumped into one eating disorder. And so we don't necessarily, or we're not necessarily distinguishing between them like we used to. They're just an eating disorder.
Just an eating disorder in general.
Just an eating disorder.
Just switch topic just briefly and everything like that. Eric, just really quickly, and this is different, but it's still interested in that whole notion of community and all along those lines. I remember I wrote a newspaper article sometime back because I've written for dailies and I've written for weeklies in addition to doing this podcasting world and being in radio. But I remember I was writing a column for our local newspaper. I think it was the News and Observer out of Raleigh, but it was about communities that were dying. And some of those communities were maritime communities and all along those lines, because some of the family people don't necessarily want to go into business. So we were talking about, like, in North Carolina, there's Wilmington, and some of the people that were in those fields don't necessarily want to go into fishing because they know the hard work that fishing is and everything like that. So I just wondered, as one that lives in a maritime community, if you've been seeing that where people are not necessarily wanting to go into the fishing business. Because I do remember this was a friend of mine that's a visual artist, and he was doing a whole portrait series around those towns here in North Carolina that are coastal towns. But he was saying that some of the coastal people, and I wrote this article before the pandemic, so it's probably about 6 or 7 years ago and everything like that, that they were, so the next generation that didn't want to go into it because they had seen their fathers and their grandfathers, and they knew what the hard work of fishing, and I imagine that those that are into whaling know the hard work of whaling. So they were like, "Nah, I'm gonna try and find me a different field," and everything like that. But that sometimes kills those industries and everything like that. So I just wondered, as one that lives in one of those kind of communities, if you're seeing that where some of the youngsters are like, "No, I think I'll go learn AI."
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But there are so many pressures on fishing communities. That's one of them. There are a lot of kids, obviously, that don't want to follow in the footsteps of their parents because fishing or many maritime jobs are very, very difficult, and there might be more attractive terrestrial jobs or things that. But the other thing that's really impacted coastal communities, especially on the East Coast where I am, I'm not as familiar with the West Coast, is that people love to live near the ocean. So real estate prices go up, and a lot of communities in just my life, I used to live on Long Island. I've lived in New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut. What I've seen is there have been many communities, like people talk about the Hamptons, the East Hamptons, Southampton, the West and or Sag Harbor or Montauk. 30, 40 years ago, when I was a kid, we used to go out there. It was not a playground of the rich, quote unquote. But what happened, it became gentrified, and now there's very little fishing taking place out there where there used to be. There used to be farms out there. Now there are vineyards on the North Fork of Long Island. And what's happened in places like Marblehead and Gloucester and New Bedford, which were at one time huge fishing communities, is that they've sort of changed, and there are fewer fishermen, fewer lobstermen, more expensive housing, and a totally different profile to the community. I'm not saying it's better or worse, just demographically, I think this is a very common story of fishing communities losing the contact with their own history because of demographic and financial changes. I mean, Billy Joel, one of my favorite artists, he has a song all about that, about how people, I can't remember the name of the song now. It was on his album Stormfront, but the entire song is about how you can't, going out fishing is dying because of a variety of reasons. It's a very common story, and it certainly affected the East Coast
Yeah, and
here.
I'm out here on the East Coast as well, and I know that the other thing is the erosion of the climate, because definitely there's always
Right.
concern that Cape Hatteras Lighthouse will fall in at some point or
Right.
another. I mean, it's not fallen in yet, but there's always that concern. And I know even on the West Coast, there's concerns about the whole state falling in, but definitely there's a
Yeah.
lot of erosion concerns that are going on, and we have seen some erosion take place. And I just heard a friend who was on another one of our shows, and they were talking about the icebergs up there in the North Pole, how they're starting to collapse as well. Because as a matter of fact, I did a judging for a film festival, the Full Frame Film Festival, and one of the films was talking about the disappearing icebergs, and there was a whole town that the icebergs is totally gone and everything
Right.
like that. And that was up there
Oh.
closer to like Greenland and stuff along that area. But it's just amazing what we're doing in terms of the erosion of the sea lands. I'm sure you're
Right.
seeing that in some of your research
There's that.
also.
There's that. You brought up something that I just wanted to comment on quickly, but first go back 1 second. Another thing that's affecting fishing communities is regulations, whether you agree with them or not. But it's become harder to be a fisherman. But about erosion, Cape Hatteras, I wrote a book called Brilliant Beacons, A History of the American Lighthouse. And I have a huge section on Cape Hatteras and a lot about North Carolina. And I know we're getting near the end. I hope you'll bear with me. I'd like to mention one thing because it'll help your listeners if they have any interest at all in my books. I've got a website, and on my website, every one of my books, I have the introduction from the book on the website. So you can go and read it. And the website is just my name. It's there on the screen. It's just ericjdolan.com. So I'm giving a shameless plug, but I worked really hard on this website. It not only has all the introductions to my books and reviews that the books have gotten, but it also has an events page, and it shows where I'm going to be speaking on my book. Unfortunately, I have no talks down in North Carolina coming up, but I will be in California, Texas, Oregon, Milwaukee, and all throughout New England. So anyway,
Milwaukee is actually where I went to school, because I went to Marquette, so I definitely have a passion for Milwaukee and all along those lines.
I've never been there.
Yeah, so this will be your first time. It's a nice town. I've spent 4.5 years there getting my college degree in the early 80s. Haven't been back since, even though they have a wonderful, I don't know what your talk is, but they have a wonderful summer festival, Summerfest. It's one of the longest running music festivals in the country, and actually in the world, because I think it's been going on for more than 50 years. And I think they even managed to keep it going. The pandemic may have closed it for a year, but then they kept it going again. So if they missed a year, it would have been only the first year of the pandemic, which I think was 2020. But I think that's the only year that they missed, and they might have even gone virtual that year. I've got to study the history and all along those lines. But yeah, I'm a big fan of the coast, because my dad takes a trip with his lady love there just about every summer. He takes those nephews that I was referring to earlier, and they go down there and all along those lines. So it's a great place, there, our coastal land, and I'm definitely a fan of Cape Hatteras. I'm glad you got that book on Cape Hatteras. And I was going to tease both you and our other guests as well, because I know that her website is also her name and everything like that. So y'all were able to do that, because not everybody does that and everything. I was actually shocking people with my email, because people were thinking I was going to have to add a number and everything, but I am a fan of blues music. So the fact that I got blues radio and didn't have to add numbers to it, folks were like, how did you manage to do that? And everything like that, when I was a blues radio DJ at the time. And I was like, nope, didn't have to add a 62, didn't have to add anything else. I just managed to get lucky in that sense. But yeah, I love it when people have their names as their website. So if you want to share your website as well and tell folks how they can hopefully have an idea of when the book will be published. And I must imagine that the website does have the book that we've been talking about with the eating disorder as well.
So I'm KarenKSmith.com. So you can find, that's where my coaching business is, and that's also where my books are, speaking engagement. There's a video of me speaking, and so yeah, that's where you can find me online, KarenKSmith.com. It's got everything you need.
That sounds good. And you're all right. We were getting ready to wrap down, and there's a couple of questions I asked toward the end and everything like that. But this is for both of you. What is the advice that, as speakers, because both of you are speakers, do you think is the biggest thing that you are hoping people take away from your speeches when you're giving speaking talks? Because I have a friend of mine, we actually have her show on the network, Barbara Smith, that is a public speaker, and she actually has this notion where she will get people to tell a story as an icebreaker. I think she's talked about being an engineer when she was a youngster, which means basically that she fixed an item and everything like that, and a race car driver when she was a youngster as well. And that's kind of her icebreaker. And I think the race car story was her actually kidnapping a vehicle and all along those lines. I can't remember the whole narrative, but she tells these ice-breaking kind of stories. But I just wondering, what are you hoping people gather from your public speaking engagements when you have them? I'll start with you first.
Who?
Let's go with let's go with Karen first.
Okay.
So it actually depends on who my audience is as to what my greatest takeaway is. So it's not always the same. However, if I were just speaking to if I was speaking to a caregivers group, you know, I would want them to take away that they don't need to do life alone. They need support. They need help, whether they want to admit it or not. So that would be my key takeaway. If I was talking to a parent with a child who had an eating disorder, I would want them to know they're not alone. There's other parents out there that are walking that. And so and in general, if I were speaking at a women's retreat, I would talk about connections, and I would talk about how vulnerability breeds connections, and our society is scared of vulnerability. And I would talk about loneliness and how we can overcome loneliness. And so it really, for me, it depends on my audience as to what my message is.
Yeah.
That makes sense. What about you, Eric?
Well, my audience are usually very similar. They're usually people who love history at libraries, museums, and historical associations and stuff like that. And I always have a slideshow. I'm very visual. But what I hope they take away from it is two things. On the one hand, I hope they walk out of there learning a little bit about a story that they either didn't know anything about, or if they did, I'm able to teach them something new. But I've really done my job if after the book talk is over, they're excited about the topic. And even better for me, because I know this maybe will come across wrong, but I'm a full-time writer. It's my job. I have to earn some money. So if they go out and buy the book, then I've really succeeded. If I can give a talk that's so good that people say, you know, I want to learn more about this topic than I can in a 40-minute talk. Let me go buy a copy of the book. Then I've done my job.
Yeah, you definitely done your job in that sense and everything. And this is for both of you and everything, both Karen and Eric. One of the things that we talk about on this show particularly is the whole notion of the imposter syndrome, or this belief that you're not as good as you think you are and everything like that. And both of you come across as very confident, but I'm always interested to hear people's advice in this space and everything like that. Because I know even in my own life and even in my age, I'm single at 64, but I know whether it's been dating or job, there have been times that I've had that little voice, and you're talking about Jimmy Cricket early or Karen, but I've had that little voice telling me, don't talk to that lady or don't go for that job, because there's that internal voice that's giving you that conversation. And I know that that's something we talk about quite often here, is the imposter syndrome, or that self-defeating belief and everything like that. So how did y'all both deal with that? Because I'm always interested in, we get some great advice from our various guests as to how they dealt with it and everything like that. So I'll start with you, Karen, but I definitely want to hear how Eric dealt with those self-defeating beliefs.
Gosh, I think I still struggle with that. I love that you said I came across as confident, because a lot of times I still feel like I struggle with imposter. Who am I to write this? Who am I to do this? But I think our education sometimes is what we use to overcome imposter syndrome. Our life situations, what we walk through, the wisdom we gain through real life, is also a way that we overcome imposter syndrome. But I think a lot of it is our self-talk. And our self-talk is, we say things to ourselves that we would never say to someone we love. And so that is how I have had to overcome that imposter syndrome, is to say, would I say this to my daughter? If not, then why do I allow myself to say it to me? And so that is how I have overcome that that imposter syndrome, is by saying, would I say this to my daughter who just wrote a book or who just put something out in the world. Would I say this to her?
Mm, yeah.
Absolutely not. So don't say it to yourself. So I think, I mean, we can use things in this world to solidify our imposter syndrome, but I think it boils down to your self-talk.
Right.
Yeah.
I think everybody has imposter syndrome. And I think often the most outwardly secure and confident people are often the most insecure. And I have a lot of experience meeting people who you think are phenomenal successes, and they are, but there's sort of quicksand under their feet if you really got down to it. But I'm not sure self-talk, I mean, the way that I think about that is don't let failure determine the outcome. Get up and try again. I often lack confidence. For example, I've given more than 400 public talks. I've been on TV. I've done all sorts of stuff. I was petrified of being a public speaker. Even when I was in school, I used to have panic attacks. And I've had to teach myself how to speak. And I've had to tell myself that they're there. The people in the audience are there. They want you to succeed. They don't want you to fall apart. Most people are nice. Most people are empathetic. Most people are scared to get up and talk in front of somebody. And most people are scared to write because they don't want to have that failure. Now, the benefit I've had over a fairly long, not a long career, but the fact that I've gone through this process many times and I've written many books and I've gotten many reviews. Fortunately, I don't think I've ever gotten a really bad review, but I've gotten some reviews that are lukewarm or I disagree with. And I've had people say, I'm not going to buy your book. That's fine. But I've gone through it so many times. My skin is thicker. That doesn't mean I still don't suffer the slings and arrows of other people, because I do. But it's sort of, I tell my kids this all the time. You think that the problem you're dealing with at this moment is the most earth-shattering important thing. Think about it, write it down, and 4 months from now, see if you even remember it. There are going to be other crises, and your life is going to be determined by how you deal with adversity and those crises, and cut yourself some slack. And I think being 64 and having been in publishing for a long time and just in life for a long time, I've seen so many times, and my wife tells me this over and over again, that you think this is the worst thing or you did a horrible job. Let's say you did an interview or radio interview and you get off and you beat yourself because I did a horrible job. I think it was really bad. Maybe it was, but the odds are it wasn't. And I have a perfect example. I gave a talk recently to a room full of booksellers. And I thought that it wasn't a very good talk. And I was down on myself after I left. And a couple of booksellers came up to me and they were talking to me about the book. And I said, that wasn't my best talk. I think the book's a lot better than it came across. And all of them said, no, you were fine. That was great. Now, maybe it wasn't great, but you're your own worst critic. And if you can somehow get past being your own worst critic and say, you know what, we're all in the same boat. Everybody's scared. Everybody doesn't know what's coming next. But the people you respect the most are the ones who forge ahead despite their insecurities, and also the ones who are empathetic and have some sense that other people are going through this too. So don't be so hard on everybody else. And the last thing I'll say, and this is so true, nobody cares about you as much as you think they do. They care about themselves. So get over yourself and just get on with it.
That's funny you said that, because I have been doing for years announcement at our city street festival. Centerfest is what it's called, but also the Blues Festival. When it was on for 30 years, I probably did it for 15, 20 years. So I've definitely been in front of thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. And like you're saying, I'm oftentimes nervous before I get on and everything like that. But as soon as I get on, I'm on and everything like that. So sometimes we have to get past that thought of the negatives, because I've been doing it for, like you said, decades and everything like that. Even when I was doing the Road to the Apollo, I would oftentimes be super nervous, but once I hit the stage, the nerves disappeared and I got into my element and I really enjoyed it. And even if I made a mistake, because one of the things that you don't want to do if you make a mistake is bring attention to the mistake. So even if I made a mistake, I learned a long time ago not to bring attention to it, because most people, they're not really paying attention to the announcer. They're looking, if it's a talent show, for the talent, to see if they like the talent. If it's a concert, they're looking for the featured act. They really are not paying attention to the opening, which is the MC, and all along those lines. So if I got in a corny joke or something to calm the nerves and everything like that, I've felt that I had done a good job. But yeah, I've been nervous and definitely had those jitters, but as soon as I hit the stage, the jitters were over and everything like that. So yeah, you just got to have confidence in yourself. And a lot of times people don't have that confidence the way that they should. So I agree with both of you that it's something we sometimes have to get past and not be as worried about it as we think we should be and everything like that. As we get to wrap up, and I'm going to have the question I ask all my guests and everything like that, and one of them y'all have kind of alluded to, which is how you can be gotten in touch with and everything. But I sometimes will ask on the show and other shows something, and you kind of alluded to it, Eric, that people might be surprised about. I was talking to a friend of mine that's going for a job interview, and I was part of the job interview process where they were being interviewed and everything like that. And I asked them a hobby and found out that they used to play women's football, which I did not know about this particular lady and everything like that. So what is a hobby or an interest that you might have had that folks would be surprised to know is in your wheelhouse or in your interest box and all along those lines? And this is for both of you and everything like that, because I have joked on this show before that I had an ex-girlfriend that tried to get me into skydiving, and to me, planes are for a purpose. They're to go from point A to point B, not to fall out of, and everything like that. So I don't think that I'm going to try to skydive, even though they were trying to get me to do that. I have thought about whitewater rafting, which can be just as bad, particularly if you don't swim and everything like that. But I have thought about that, but I haven't got around to it. But is there an interest of yours or a hobby that people might be surprised to know that you have? So Karen, is there a hobby or an interest of yours that folks might be surprised to know that you have? It might even be something as simple as playing board games.
Oh, I guess one thing that I don't do as often now as I used to, but I used to be an avid piano player. And that was actually my first job, as I taught piano lessons as a high school student. And so I taught piano lessons for many, many years. And so that's not something that I advertise about myself now. I mean, when that's just not something I'm going to put on my bio, is that I've done that, but it was definitely a love of mine, was playing the piano.
Yeah. I'm a very serious gardener. I mean, we have a lot of gardens, not vegetable garden. We used to do that, but gardener. And I mean, really into it. I read books about it. I was out doing it this morning, so much so that people have asked to hire me as a landscaper. I haven't done that yet. I've helped people out a little bit, but I just love being outside. I love digging. I love transplanting. And I just love the color palette and knowing a little bit about the plants, sitting outside, watching bees. I enjoy that a lot. So I don't know, I'm into gardening.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that earlier, gardening, and actually a friend of mine got me into bird watching and bird listening. So there's actually an app called Merlin that I actually
I have Merlin.
installed on my phone, and I actually listen to that, and I'm surprised at some of the birds that are here in the area, including herons that are coming from the coast and everything like that. But they're coming here as part of their migration and everything like that. But I do enjoy, even if I'm at a bus stop or out and about, listening to that app and hearing the different birds that exist, some of them that might surprise you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's created by Cornell University. So it's actually created by some folks up there in your neck of the woods, if I remember correctly, and everything like that. The other thing that I get all my guests to talk about in this show and everything like that is the notion of a message of positivity, because we are a global network. It's founded by my friends Nick Paveda and Kim Calhoun. So I always get my guests to give a message of positivity, because I figure the more message of positivity we give, the better we help make the world. So call it my, you mentioned earlier, Karen, ministry, call it my semi-ministry and everything like that. So I'll start with you. What would be your message of positivity to the global community and everything like that? And it can be anything, whatever crosses your mind, but a message of positivity to our global community.
My message of positivity comes from what I write about, for sure, but just be kind. Like we
Mm.
don't know. I've we don't know someone's story. We don't know what they're
Mhm.
walking through. We don't know. And so
Mhm.
we're quick to get mad and honk our horn and yell or say something nice, not nice, you know. And so, man, just be kind because we don't know what other people are walking through. And then I would tag on to that is that you are never in such a terrible space in your life that you can't give positivity or joy to someone else. And by sharing that positivity and joy with someone else is often what brings healing to our own selves.
Right.
That makes sense. What
I,
about you, Eric?
I think that's a good message, a great message, and sort of along the same lines. Despite our differences, and whether that be cultural differences, country differences, you live in a different city, I still believe, although it's hard for me at times, given my understanding of history and current situations, most people I truly believe are good and want to be nice and want to do the right thing. And if you just give them a chance and actually have conversations instead of generalizing about them without knowing them, you're often surprised. And in my life, I've been surprised so many times by people who I thought A about them, but then I actually got to know them and I discovered it's B. I mean, they're just, I'm wrong a lot of the times. And you can make, human beings are very quick to make snap judgments about others. And in my own life, I feel that a lot of my judgments initially are wrong. So you got to go a little bit further and give people a chance. And it's it's a struggle because I think people are naturally judgmental and they sort of compartmentalize everybody else in their life.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have to teach you earlier because earlier, Eric, you said that your wife gave you that kind of like ultimatum. I won't call it ultimatum, but basically this notion that if you make a certain amount of, if we collect enough money, then you can go off and become an author. And I wonder if
Right.
more and more people will be doing that now that they've heard this story from you on this particular show. They're going to be getting this notion of like, if you save this amount of money, then you can go off and become a musician or a writer or whatever their desire is and everything.
Well, the theory was, and this is advice that writers are given. The idea is that if you save enough money, I saved a year's worth of my salary because my wife didn't know if I was going to be successful. Being a writer is a lousy career choice if you want to make a good living. I've done well, but I couldn't live the life I live if my wife didn't have a good job and I didn't work for many years and we saved all that kind of stuff. But the reason she wanted me to put aside a year's worth of my salary is because if I fell flat on my face, she wanted to still be able to put food on the table and give me enough time to look for another job. So that's really what it was all about.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense and everything like that. Hey, Karen, just really quickly, and then I'm gonna play this video to get us totally out of here and everything like that. But what is something about Arkansas that people would be surprised to know? And I'm gonna ask the same thing of Eric about his town and everything like that. But what is something about Arkansas that people, and particularly your part of Arkansas, that people would be surprised to know? Because whenever I think of Arkansas, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is Bill Clinton and farmland, and of course, Little Rock and its history to civil rights, which you kind of alluded to earlier and everything like that. But what is something that surprised you about your area and your state?
So my area where I grew up in very agricultural part of Arkansas. And so that is what a lot of people think of when they think of Arkansas. However, I can say not too far from me is like the duck hunting capital of the world in a little place called Stuttgart,
Oh
Arkansas.
yeah.
And
Yep.
it's like the duck hunting capital in Arkansas. So that's a little
Okay.
fact that people don't know. A lot of people don't know unless you're a duck hunter.
Yeah. I am familiar with Stuttgart because I wrote a book a long time ago called The Duck Stamp Story, the history of the duck stamp program. So anyway, one thing unusual about our my community is that Marblehead claims, and there's only one other town that claims it, to have the most standing houses in town that were built before the American Revolution. And it's almost 300. And one of them is the one I'm sitting in. My house was built in 1753, so it's pretty old. So that's an interesting thing. And I don't know what this video is you're going to show, but I do have to warn you, I've got to hop off in about 5 minutes because I've got another interview that I've got to get ready for.
No, we'll be off within the 5 minutes. It's a very short video, and I'll actually have you answer, and then Karen answer. This will be in backwards order and everything like that. And I understand older buildings and everything like that, because the Cultural Arts Center that I work at was a converted church. So it's been a Cultural Arts Center since 1975. So it's 51 years at the Hayti Heritage Center. But before that, it was the AME Church, or one of the many churches that were part of the growth after slavery and everything like that. So the church, the building is actually built since 1869. It started as a brush arbor, and then I think the church physically was built in like 1891. So it's a over 100-year-old church that exists and everything like that. But part of its existence was as a brush arbor, which means that they had the property first, as people just having church outside. So they had the property before they physically built the church and everything along those lines. But so the video I'm going to play is about education. It's a group out of Oklahoma, not that far from Arkansas, I don't think, and everything like that. But they honoring both teachers, guidance counselors, and support staff. So they're not just honoring the teachers, but they're also honoring support staff, whether that's the cafeteria worker, the guidance counselor, the janitor, the secretary, a number of others as well. And they've been doing that for a few years. So the question I'm going to ask before I play the video, so I'll ask you so that you can go first and get on out of here, is who is a teacher or somebody that inspired you, Eric? So who is a teacher or maybe even a support staff that inspired you in your life?
Okay, I'll have to pick Dr. Plant, my high school biology teacher. That was his real name, Plant, and his wife's real name was Rose. So she was Rose Plant. And he inspired me because I took biology with him, and that's back when I wanted to be a marine biologist, Jacques Cousteau. And he's the one that encouraged me to write that big report on the seashells of Long Island Sound. But he was always very positive and encouraging, and I would go to his house outside of school and we go on little nature walks. Now, he's not alive. He died many years ago. I like to think that he'd be proud of what I've done with my life, even though it's not biology directly, but he instilled in me a sense of wonder about the world. And also at a time when I wasn't a great high school student, I was okay. He gave me confidence. He believed in me. He thought I had a unique voice. And so I always appreciate having him as a teacher early on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do love those unique names. A friend of mine that was a teacher over at a family friend, a teacher over at UNC. And I think there's even a building named after her and everything like that. But Sonia Stone actually named her daughter Precious. So if you get that, her name is literally Precious Stone. I think she may be married. So it may have changed by now. But I know growing up, she was Precious Stone. So I can give that whole attitude of Rose Plant because she was Precious Stone and everything like that. Before I play this video, and that's what will get us out of here, Karen, and everything like that, what is a teacher that inspired you and everything along those lines? So who is a teacher, or maybe it's even a support staff, maybe it was a guidance counselor or a cafeteria worker?
I would say my 7th grade English teacher, because he always had a corny joke, always. And he was one of these good Southern agricultural boys. So he had that Southern accent twang, but he made you think. And so as a middle school, for a teacher to get you outside of yourself and to make you think critically about things was a super helpful skill as I went through life. And so I would have to say him.
Well, I appreciate that and everything. So we're going to play this video and get us on out of here and everything like that. And hopefully people have enjoyed this interview. Like I said, that's why I do these dinner parties. I invite 2 to 4 people and we just learn from each other as we've been doing today. So I hope y'all enjoyed the interview as much as I enjoyed conducting these and all along those lines. But it's been a fun conversation, and I hope that I'll see y'all in some future shows and future conversations as well. But I hope that y'all enjoyed it, because this is what I do, is bring people together and we learn from each other. And I like what you did earlier, Eric, and what you did, Karen, where the guests interview with each other as well. So that's kind of what I hope happens in these conversations. So I hope y'all enjoyed it. But right now we're going to play this video to get us on out of here. It's a 55-second video that is from the gentleman in Oklahoma. So if you got to bounce before then, Eric, I'll understand. But this will be the final thing to get us on out of here. But I thoroughly enjoyed having you both as guests.
Thank you.
No problem.
I won't fold, I won't drop until we on top. Only going non-stop, non-stop. I won't fold, I won't drop until we on top. Only going non-stop.
I want
thank everyone for coming to the 2020 TAF Awards. This was a show like no other, people. This is the Grammys for dignitaries, educators, and support staff around the state of Oklahoma and worldwide. We cannot do this without the support of the people. So we thank you, I thank you, for being such a dedicated supporter to this movement for the Teachers Appreciation Foundation. I thank you.
I won't fold.